Barbara must be feeling better then.
I
Yeah.
hope so.
So, yeah, and our internet may be,
We'll do the best we can.
if we freeze, let me know when I come back
Yeah,
so that I
yeah.
can catch up where I was. And we're having a lot of trouble with internet right now. Okay. We've been studying John's account about Jesus. That's the book of John. And John's emphasis was on Jesus' deity, the fact that he was God. The whole first chapter introduces Jesus as God. He was the creator, but he, as the creator, he came into the world and was not accepted by the world or by his own people. What a sad state of affairs. Then John continued to the introduction by telling us about John the Baptist and how John the Baptist prepared the way for Jesus. And John related the Apostle John related the smooth transition from John the Baptist's ministry to the beginning of Jesus' ministry. Last week we talked about how John the Baptist introduced two of his disciples to Jesus, and they immediately followed Jesus and became Jesus' disciples. And so in today's passage, John describes Jesus' first miracle of turning water into wine. This is a great one. This miracle is not recorded in any of the other gospels. In fact, John related only two miracles that were also included in the other gospels. All of the other miracles that John related were not recorded anywhere else. He picked things that Jesus did that emphasized the point that he was trying to make to show that Jesus is God. There are two miracles in the book of John that are in the other gospels. The first is the feeding of the 5,000, and the second is Jesus walking on water. All the other miracles that Jesus did, as recorded by the Apostle John, are unique. But I love what John says at the end of the book. He says, if everything was written about Jesus, the whole world couldn't contain it.
Yeah.
And there was so much. So we're going to pick up with John we're in John chapter 2, verses 1 through 11. We'll read it in just a minute, but I want to kind of do a little introduction to the wedding thing before we get into it. So Jesus was already in Galilee based upon what we studied last week. Remember that he went there with Andrew and probably John and met Peter, Philip, and Nathaniel. So this event occurred the wedding event occurred only 3 days after Jesus met Nathaniel, because it says right in the very beginning of this thing, it says on the third day there was a wedding. So it happened. It was 3 days. So the Apostle John gives us a time hack here. Before we talk about the wedding, I want to talk about a little bit of background about Jesus' life. I think this is important before the wedding. So at this time, Jesus was 30 years old. How do we know that? I look it up today. I keep saying he's 30 years old. I know it says it somewhere. I found it. Luke chapter 3, verse 23 says, Jesus, when he began his ministry, was about 30 years of age. So Luke was a doctor and he was a stickler on details, and he gives us a lot of details. And it was important to know from the Holy Spirit's perspective and Luke's perspective that Jesus began his ministry at about 30 years old. By the evidence in Scripture, it seems that Joseph had died sometime before this. The last time, Joseph being Jesus' stepdad. The last time he was mentioned was when Jesus went to the temple for the first time at age 12, recorded in the book of Luke. Being the firstborn of the family, he would have had responsibility to take over the family business and for caring for the family after Joseph's death. We don't know how long this was. There's just no mention of it. It was probably several years, but we don't know. Joseph was a carpenter, right? We know that. Jesus was known as in Nazareth as the carpenter. We know that from Mark 6:3. It says, is not this these are people in Nazareth saying this, is this not the carpenter, the son of Mary, and the brother of James and Joseph and Judas and Simon? Are not his sisters with us here with us? So Jesus was the carpenter in Nazareth after his dad's death. Wouldn't you like to have seen some of the things that Jesus made? Jesus was a craftsman. He knew what it meant to work hard to support a family, because he was the leader of the family until he came of age at age 30. So in their culture, a young man would come of age at age 30. He came of age at age 30 and turned the business over to his brother. We assumed that he turned it over to his brother James, who would have been the next older after him. So Jesus had brothers and sisters, and they didn't believe in him until after his resurrection. And I don't remember if it's in John or not, but Jesus specifically, when he rose from the dead, he specifically met with his brother James. And James, his brother, became the leader of the church in Jerusalem later on. We know that from the book of Acts. Okay, let's get into, somebody read, Bob, could you read John 2, chapter 2, verses 1 and 2?
Yep, can. On the third day, there was a wedding at Cana in Galilee. The mother of Jesus was there. Jesus also was invited to the wedding with his disciples.
So again, these verses have a timing on the third day. And John does this throughout the book, and we'll pick those up. He says, after this, or, there's these little time hacks he puts in it so that we can keep track of the timeline. So it's about the third day. It was the third day after Jesus was introduced to Nathanael.
Yeah.
So how many disciples did he have at the time?
Okay.
Peter, Andrew, James, John, Nathaniel.
5.
Five.
He had 5.
Okay. Well, I'm sitting right in front of the TV.
He had 5.
You're gonna have to get up and walk over to that cabinet. Or pull out.
So Mary, at the time of the wedding, Jesus had only just begun his public ministry. So he would have been well known in the community as the carpenter. And Mary was invited, and Jesus was invited. Even his disciples were invited. It was very likely the couple being married were relatives. Very likely they were relatives in some way. And it makes sense that if Mary was invited, that Jesus also would be invited, because he had been the head of his household. But not only was Jesus invited, but his disciples were invited. So that's good. We don't know of any more than the 5 that we've been introduced to so far. So Nancy, could you read John chapter 2, verses 3 through 11, the miracle?
Okay, when the wine ran out, the mother of Jesus said to him, They have no wine. And Jesus said to her, Woman, what does this have to do with me? My hour has not yet come. His mother said to the servants, Do whatever he tells you. Now there were 6 stone water jars there for the Jewish rites of purification, each holding 20 or 30 gallons. Jesus said to the servants, Fill the jars with water. And they filled them to the brim. And he said to them, Now draw some out and take it to the master of the feast. So they took it. When the master of the feast tasted the water, when the master of the feast tasted the water, now had become wine, and did not know where it came from, though the servants had drawn the water new. The master of the feast called the bridegroom and said to him, Everyone serves the good wine first, and when the people have drunk freely, then the poor wine. But you have kept the good wine until now.
So, first of all, about the wine. There are people that will say that it wasn't really wine, it had to be only grape juice. Or
Your mother.
or that the wine was only symbolic. No, it was wine. God calls it what it was wine. What the master of the feast said in one way to translate it, I'm going to say this is one way to translate it. I found this in one of the commentaries. It says, everyone serves the good wine first and then the cheaper wine when the guests are drunk.
Yeah.
Then when you're drunk, I
won't
guess
care.
you don't care as much.
No.
Not all translations read that way, but that's the inference in the Greek. Now, I did read in one of the commentaries that D.A. Carson, who was a conservative Bible scholar of years past, said that the wine of those times was often diluted to between 1/10 to 1/3 its original alcohol content, making it about the same amount of alcohol or slightly less than American beer. Wine at full strength was considered strong drink at the time, but it was indeed real wine. You can drink enough of anything with a little bit of alcohol in it, it'll make you drunk. So the wedding feast during Jesus' day usually lasted a whole week.
Yeah.
It was a real celebration, and wine was important to it. And running out of wine was a major issue. It would have been a huge embarrassment for the family of the bridegroom. Huge embarrassment.
This may be what happens when you show up with a bunch of disciples.
Yeah.
You're drinking all the wine.
Yeah. So we don't know Mary's association with the bride and groom, but somehow she found out that they'd run out of wine. She was probably,
Well, the women were in the kitchen.
yeah. I had a feeling that she was related in their doing. John told us this was Jesus' first miracle. Now, there are some non-biblical stories out there about Jesus doing miracles as a child, but they are not substantiated by the Bible. And I just don't believe they happened. If they're not written in the Bible, I don't believe it happened. I don't believe that Jesus had ever done any miracles yet. And Mary wouldn't even have known that Jesus could do miracles if he hadn't done any yet. So why would Mary even approach Jesus? I had to really think about this.
Don't worry about it. I just have to crawl.
Jesus had been the head of her family for a while, and many people think that in that role, he'd been very resourceful. I think Mary had learned to depend on him to come up with answers, non-miraculous answers to problems. I don't think Mary knew what Jesus would do, only that he would think of something. Because when he was the head of the household and they had problems with the business or whatever with the family, he always thought of something.
Yeah, it would have been him.
Otherwise, she would have just said, "Hey, Jesus, can you do a miracle?" Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
She never said that. She just said, "Oh no, they ran out of wine."
Yeah. And so she trusted him. She knew well, we know that she knew who Jesus was because the angel Gabriel explained it to her. I always say, can you imagine growing up with a brother who was sinless or a child who was sinless. I can't imagine it.
Our variety didn't come that way.
No, no. Mary knew Jesus. Mary knew Jesus was very resourceful. But Jesus' response to Mary was rather curt.
Now, I had a pastor one time that explained that when he says woman, he wasn't being sarcastic. It was like saying lady. It was not like woman, you know,
No, yeah, and he was being very formal.
right. But he wasn't being rude. It was,
No.
but
And it doesn't mean he didn't love his mother. I think he was trying to emphasize to Mary that his role with her had changed.
right.
Um,
Well, how many languages did it go from when he said it to English?
yeah, who knows? Yeah,
That woman may have been the best word that they had to go by.
yeah.
Well, yeah, it's what it meant. Yeah.
And there was a time set by God for Jesus to begin his public miracles, but Jesus was saying, this isn't the time for it for me to do a miracle. But you know what? His response to Mary did not deter her. He had come to trust, she had come to trust Jesus completely. And she had more time with him than anybody else. She had 30 years with him. And so I thought, what a lesson to us. Do we depend on Jesus completely? Yeah. We may not understand what Jesus is doing, but we can certainly trust him to get it right because he always does. He always has in my life, man. So even though it wasn't time for Jesus' public miracles to start, Jesus did turn the water into wine. Remember in chapter 1, Jesus said, the Apostle John said that Jesus came giving us grace on grace multiplied. And one of the translations says grace piled on grace. Jesus came giving, and in this instance, Jesus gave Mary grace and did what she asked because he loved her. Only a few people knew what happened. Jesus knew it. Jesus' disciples knew it. Mary and the servants knew it. It was a perfect solution. It was done in the background without fanfare or notoriety, but the problem was resolved. Mary trusted Jesus to be the problem solver, and he solved the problem. So, how much wine was created? I figured it out. It's about 120 to 180 gallons of wine. That's an awful lot of wine.
It cost a lot of money to have to buy that.
Yes, it would have cost a lot of money.
So there must have been a lot of guests.
That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah. And I wonder if there's any left over at the end of the wedding celebration. It would have been good wine. God never creates anything that is substandard. Never.
And his blessings are abundant. So this would have been a blessing of wine, I guess.
I'm sure.
Well, if she did here in America, that'd be a felony.
Yeah.
That's enough gallons to be a felony.
Non-taxed.
Yeah.
If the revenue were after them.
But I just think about if God's making it, it's going to be good. It's going to be really.
I would like to have tasted it because I've never tasted wine yet that I liked. Some of it to me is just nasty, but
The
if God made
closest
it,
thing was that
Auslese.
Auslese from 1976.
It was sweet, and most people that like wine don't like sweet. I like it if it tastes like grape juice. But I'm not a very good drinker. But if I would like to see if God made it, it would have been good, I'm sure. So
Yeah. Sure.
Yes.
And the problem was resolved, and then people, And you know, and Jesus was thinking also, he was thinking about Mary, but he was also thinking about the groom. I think he liked the groom and he was taking care of the groom because it would have been a huge embarrassment to the family, the
Right.
groom's family.
Hospitality was so important.
Yes, hospitality was incredibly important. And Jesus cared for them and he took care of it behind the scenes. His time wasn't come, but he just took care of it. But then in verse 11, we get the full purpose of the miracle. JB, could you read John 2:11?
2:11.
Yep.
Let me find two. It's on here. Oh, there it is. 2:11. This beginning of signs Jesus did in Cana of Galilee, and
Manifested.
okay, it's split line, manufacture.
Manifested.
I've lost 11. Manifested his story, and his disciples believed in him.
There you go.
Manifested, so I had to get them together.
Yeah. So why did Jesus do this miracle? And if the time for public miracles had not yet come, he was trying to, he was working with his disciples. He was discipling his disciples. He wanted to show them who he was. He wanted them to believe in him. Remember what Jesus told Nathanael? He said, "You'll see greater things than these." This miracle was one of those first greater things that Jesus promised to Nathanael.
Mhm.
And
That's what it says later in John too. I mean, miracles were performed, but we may believe. John
that
says
we
that.
may believe. That's right.
I can't remember it. Later on in John somewhere.
It's later on in John. You're right. It is later on in John. By doing this miracle, John said that Jesus manifested his glory. He manifested means he showed it. He produced it and showed it to them. Jesus revealed the fact that he was God. Only God.
That's John. Yeah. That's John 20, 30, 30 and 31 is where that is.
Yeah.
Right.
Mhm. Only God can create. Only God can create. By turning the water into wine, he was creating. Because wine has a lot of attributes in its chemical structure that are very, very different from water.
They have nothing to do with water.
Well, there's water as part
No,
of it.
but you've got to have sugar and you've got to have the grape juice and you got to have yeast and you have got all those things. It's not,
All those the flavors and all the details of a good wine.
Yep.
He
Got to have smelly feet to stomp on them.
they get that special flavor.
yeah.
That's a different kind of wine.
Only God can create.
Yeah.
And turning water into wine was a small thing for Jesus, but he still proved he was the creator at that moment.
So it ties back to John 1 and 2, that in him, all things were made through him. So this is right,
Mhm.
right next chapter. There's no chapter separations in the original.
That's right. And he had just gotten these new 5 disciples, and he was showing them who he was.
Right.
I look, thinking about, everything we've talked about, it's dawned on me, it's not my time. And I think what he was saying was, it's not my time to make it public.
Yes.
It doesn't mean he had never done any miracles, but it's not my time to be public anymore yet.
To declare himself.
But he privately did it for the family and for the disciples.
Right.
Yes. That's right. That's right.
Makes sense.
Yeah, of course. And John 2:12, read that, Martha.
After this, he went down to Capernaum with his mother and his brothers and his disciples, and they stayed there for a few days.
So after the wedding, Jesus and his disciples went to Capernaum with Jesus' mother and brothers. And well, it hadn't been long since Jesus had taken off and given the business over to his brother, and he was still close to his family. I mean, they were brothers and sisters, and they knew each other, and you know, you go where your family is. He'd been with his earthly family for a long time from an earth perspective, not from a heavenly perspective, of course. It only makes sense that he would want to spend days with them. And from my reading of the Gospels, this was probably the last time Jesus really spent much time with his family. After he truly went public and started talking to people outside of his family, his brothers became a distraction rather than a help because they didn't believe in him.
You know, there was the one place, I can't remember where it was. They said, your mother and your brothers and stuff are outside. And he said, well, who are my mothers and brothers? And when he just kept right on teaching.
Right.
He didn't go back.
Well, that's when he healed the guy that came down the
Mhm.
roof, I think.
Yeah, I said right in there someplace, but he didn't go outside to talk with mom. He just kept right on teaching.
Mhm.
So they were around. I'm sure they were around.
Oh, they were around, but they weren't.
It doesn't record him staying there.
No, yeah, and they weren't a real help. And
Yeah.
we even know we'll get to it as we get to the end of John that when Jesus was on the cross, he was concerned about somebody taking care of his mother. So he looked at John and said to the disciple that he loved, I think is the way he put it.
Yeah.
He said, "Here is your mother," and he looked at his mother and he said, "Here is your son."
Yeah.
And John ever from that time on took care of Mary.
Not his brother.
In his household, not his brother James, because I think Jesus was estranged from his brothers and sisters at the time. Later on, they, you know, after Jesus appeared to James, they all came to believe, but at that time they weren't believing.
Yeah.
And so Jesus wanted to take care of Mary, and John did that. So that is it's an interesting story. Then there's, you know, Jesus Jesus was just showing himself, and he was just beginning to show himself. As we get deeper into John, he reveals himself more and more to it, and he picks up his disciples and starts teaching them who he is. And next time we meet, we'll study the cleansing of the temple, and that will be John chapter 2, verses 13 to 25.
First cleansing of the temple.
Yeah, this is the first. Actually, Jesus cleansed the temple twice, and we'll talk about that more next time we meet. Questions, comments on this?
Are we still on recorded or not? I can't remember.
We're on record still.
Oh,
Yeah, I'll wait till you go off.
Okay.